The origins of the all-big gun battleship in the United States Navy can be traced back to 1901, where discussions were initially held. However, serious considerations did not begin until 1903, when the General Board recognized that advances in torpedo technology was making battleship engagements less and less likely, as, at the time, there was no real fire control system for the battleship's main caliber guns, and as a result, battle ranges were short, about 3,000 yards. But torpedoes were now capable of traveling 3,000 yards, meaning battleships getting close to one another could also fall victim to torpedoes from fleet destroyers, and as a result, the United States Navy would be reluctant to send in its big expensive battleships. Due to this concern, the Naval War College was tasked with studying two variations of battleship. One would have a focus on torpedo armament rather than artillery, and the other would focus on improving fire control for large artillery to increase battle ranges so torpedoes were no longer a threat. As would be expected, the studies would find means to reliably extend the ranges at which battleships could reliably land hits, and so the General Board would continue investigating designs which focused on large caliber guns with fire control systems to increase firing range, and this concept was validated by the Russo-Japanese War, which began in 1904. Prior to the Russo-Japanese War validating these concepts, the United States began investigating the all-big gun battleship design in July of 1903, when two theoretical ships were created. Both would mount 12 guns in the hexagonal arrangement, similar to that of the future Japanese Setsu or German Nassau. One design would have 11-inch guns and the other 12-inch guns. The War College would conduct war games with these two designs, and they would report that they found a guarded expression of approval in the report of one committee on the composition of the fleet. In other words, increasing the gun range was found to be a practical solution. These games also found that though firing range had increased to about 4,500 to 6,000 yards, that destroyers would still make an attempt to close in to torpedo range and launch an attack. And in order for a battleship to defend itself from these pessimistic vessels, they needed to have some type of anti-torpedo boat armament, which initially the medium caliber gun, 8, 9, and 10-inch weapons, were considered, but their rate of fire was considered too low. As a result, it was recommended that a hefty battery of 3-inch anti-torpedo boat guns would be installed in order to keep up a high rate of fire against destroyers and also minimize the weight on the battleship. As a result of those findings, in October of 1903, the General Board requested that the Bureau of Construction and Repair begin designing battleships armed with 8 12-inch guns and a secondary battery of an unspecified amount of 3-inch guns. Before any design work began, in January of 1904, the General Board altered its design request. It now wanted to investigate a battleship armed with 4 12-inch guns and 8 10-inch or 11-inch guns, and they also wanted to investigate a higher speed. The reason behind these alterations remains unclear, but it ultimately does not matter because the Bureau of Construction and Repair did not investigate any of the requests that the General Board had made, claiming that their workload was too great. During the summer of 1904, further war games were held, and the War College would once again reiterate what it had already specified in 1903, and as a result, the General Board had asked for Poundstone to develop the first designs. He created feasible, probable, and possible. These 3 designs got larger and theoretically more powerful as he went on, and while the United States Navy would never seriously consider constructing any of these ships, Lieutenant Sims would present them to then-President Theodore Roosevelt, whom looked upon them with great enthusiasm and requested that the Bureau of Construction and Repair investigate a ship with such characteristics, and as a result, their delay in creating their own designs came to an end. The initial solution was a bit strange, as the design they had created was taking the 1904 battleship, New Hampshire, and replacing its 4 twin 8-inch turrets, which created a hexagonal arrangement, with either 4 twin 10-inch turrets or 4 single 12-inch turrets. It was found that swapping the 8-inch turrets out with anything larger created strain on the vessel's structure, and so it was decided that a hexagonal arrangement on a 16,000-ton ship was impractical without compromising other characteristics of the vessel, like protection, which was a no-go. By 1904, the United States was more than capable of constructing a ship larger than 16,000 tons. However, Congress had capped battleship displacement at 16,000 tons, and on the 3rd of March 1905, when the budget was approved for battleships South Carolina and Michigan, they still capped displacement at 16,000 tons. Due to this complication, Chief Constructor Washington Capps had come up with an interesting solution. He recognized that using wing turrets was wasteful on a limited displacement, as not all guns could fire on a broadside. So he proposed what became known as the superfiring turret, where one turret would be slightly elevated over a lower turret, with all turrets being on the center line. This meant that there would be no waste of space or displacement. There were some arguments that firing dead ahead or astern with the superfiring turret would not be possible due to blast effects, but since the Navy was focusing on broadside engagements, Capps had recognized that the blast effect wouldn't matter. While the advantages of the superfiring turret were clear, it gave the designers a headache as they had to completely rearrange the vessels as they previously knew them. For example, the superfiring turret resided within an armored barbette, which stuck up quite high above deck level. As a result, this increased top weight, and so the forecastle deck had to be cut down about 25% from the after end. The very bow and stern of the vessel would primarily be occupied by the now increased in size magazines. So, the officers' quarters, which were normally aft on a U.S. ship, now had to be moved amidships as a result of the loss of space. Due to the new magazine arrangements, machinery would also have to be rearranged. Initially, it was expected that 1/3 of the boilers would have to be removed from the design completely, but ultimately it was decided to remove the central bulkhead, and all of the boilers were effectively squeezed into place. There were also voids created from the outer hull to the boilers to allow flooding to occur in the event a torpedo struck. By the time all of the rearrangements and testing had been concluded, 19 designs, A through S, had been drafted, and Design S was selected to progress further. Throughout the summer of 1904, working plans for Design S were created, and they were approved on the 23rd of November, 1905, just a week before the British laid the keel to the Dreadnought. The completed design would see a ship with a standard displacement of 16,000 tons and a full load displacement of 17,600 tons. They would have an overall length of 453 feet, a beam of 80 feet, and a draft of 24.5 feet. They would have 12 Babcock and Wilcox boilers connecting to 2 triple expansion steam engines, producing a maximum speed of 18.5 knots. The ships would be equipped with 8 12-inch 45 caliber Mark V guns in 4 twin-mount turrets, 22 single-mount 3-inch 50 caliber guns, 2 3-pounder 47mm guns, 8 1-pounder 37mm guns, and 2 21-inch torpedo tubes. The armor protection would see that the main belt had a maximum thickness of 12 inches, the turrets had a faceplate of 12 inches, side plate of 8 inches, and a roof of 2.5 inches, while the barbettes had a maximum thickness of 10 inches, and the decks had a maximum thickness of 2.5 inches. The first ship, Battleship 26, would be laid down on the 18th of December, 1906, at William Cramp and Sons. It was launched on the 11th of July, 1908, and commissioned on the 1st of March, 1910, being named South Carolina. The second ship, Battleship 27, would be laid down on the 17th of December 1906 at New York Shipbuilding Corporation. It'd be launched on the 26th of May 1908 and commissioned on the 4th of January 1910, being named Michigan. The South Carolina-class battleships would be very significant vessels for their time, as they would introduce the superfiring arrangement and the subsequent interior rearrangement that went along with it, while other navies continued to use wing turrets. In every respect, the arrangement of the South Carolina's design would be the grandfather to the standard dreadnought-type battleship of every nation. Even with their significant upsides, there were also significant downsides. For example, the torpedo defense system was quite primitive and in most respects would have been ineffective in a practical sense. It was by no means as elaborate as what the Germans would be installing on their dreadnought-type battleships. The propulsion plant was also primitive in its own respect as well. While other navies were beginning to use turbines, which produced less vibrations and were more efficient steam-wise, the United States would continue to use reciprocating engines all the way up to the USS Nevada. That puts these vessels in an interesting position. By no means were they bad, but by no means were they excellent. They were simply adequate ships. With that having been said, I have nothing more I wish to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.